Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Kurt Visnick. I'm up here in beautiful Fargo, North Dakota, and I really mean that. We're having almost a 50-degree day today, and I know for some of you in Florida or California, Texas, you go 50 degrees. It's cold. I mean, I bet if I went into town today, I'd see people running around in shorts. That's how crazy we are up here. When we've had zero already this year, this fall, it's nice to see a 50-degree day. But enough about the weather. We can't change that. But you know, as I look at things and I enjoy where life is going for me. The other day I had a conversation with a friend of mine from out in New York, and Bill's story is just amazing. And you know, back when he was in college, he went to donate some blood, and they told him, they said, "Hey, you've got something wrong here. We can't take your blood." And it changed his life. It changed his life, and for the longest time, he looked for a way of finding a, you know, I'll call it a cure, but he looked for a way of helping himself. And it wasn't until he came upon Sisel that he really found the answer. Yeah, so let's hear that story. Bill, are you with me?
Yes, Doc. Can you hear me?
I hear you loud and clear. And you know, and every time I hear your story, I just enjoy hearing. I enjoy talking to you about it. And like we said, we could talk for hours on different things involving science and all of that. You know, and kind of give us a background. You were going to medical school when you got diagnosed, right?
Well, actually, I had already completed a degree, a pre-medical college curriculum, and was going to become a dentist, but then I changed career paths, and I decided to go into something different. I wanted to go into medical imaging, and I needed to get an electronics degree, so I was actually working on a second degree in electronics when I came to college one day and saw a Lacotte set up and found out they were having a blood drive.
And what year was that?
Okay, I was 25 years old. It was 1976.
1976. And when you went to donate the blood, what did they tell you?
Well, what happened was, you know, all my friends, I had never donated blood in my life, and all my friends were donating blood. I figured I was in pretty good health because I was 5'6", 146 pounds. I looked like the picture of health. You know, I felt great, and I didn't want to be left out, so I went ahead and donated blood. No big deal. But 2 days later, I got this urgent letter from the New York Blood Center, and I opened the letter, and it says, "You need to call us immediately. We tested your blood. Your cholesterol is over 500. Your triglycerides are 1,200. That's 1,000 above the red line of 200. That was a walking time bomb. I couldn't believe it. It was really a shock.
And, you know, does heart disease run in your family?
Yes, it does, Doc. Yeah, in fact, I'll never forget how three of my uncles, my father's three brothers, all of them died of massive heart attacks. They literally dropped dead of massive heart attacks in the streets of Brooklyn. And none of them saw their 60th birthday. But because I had been fortunate enough to studying pre-medical, I have actually recognized the early signs of a heart attack that my dad was having at 56, and I got aspirin into him right away and took him to the hospital. And back then, 45 years ago, whatever, the average person on the street had no idea of how well aspirin, what an important role it can play, when you introduce it at the first sign of a heart attack. Because nowadays, all men over 50, 55, everyone's taking a baby aspirin. Everyone knows about it now. But it was like, it was like over 30 years from that time that I happened to be privy to that information. That was well known in the medical community, but it took over 30 years for that information to make it out to the general public when Bayer aspirin was allowed by the FDA and the American Medical Association to start doing infomercials to educate people about the importance of aspirin, how it could help save a life. But it's amazing, Doc. I'm sure you've seen this over and over again about these discoveries that take years, very important information that takes years and years to get out to the general public. I think we're experiencing the same thing with Decoid and even resveratrol. A lot of people still don't know about resveratrol because you and I know the reason why, and we're going to go over that on this call.
You bet. Well, and the other day you and I were talking about, Dr. Sinclair and how he had made these important discoveries about resveratrol, and he was actually given his own research facility at Harvard, and I had never heard that part of the story. But can you kind of give us a little background on what Dr. Sinclair discovered with resveratrol, and what really happened to it, with the whole big pharma.
Sure. Yeah. No. I mean, this is Dr. David Sinclair made one of the greatest, in fact, two of the greatest discoveries in the history of human health. And here's a very brilliant PhD biochemist who emigrated from Australia to the United States in the late 1990s and first took up studies at MIT. And when he published his first round of research reports, that he was actually studying the French paradox. And to this day, a lot of people don't know what the French paradox is, but the French paradox is something that puzzled doctors and scientists for, well in excess of 75 years. How is it that the French people, who have among the fattiest diets of any culture in the world, have the lowest incidence of heart disease and stroke and even many types of cancer? And it was Dr. Sinclair who actually cracked that paradox. He's the one who figured that out. But when he published his first round of papers, it caught the attention of the folks over at Harvard Medical School. They invited him over for a visit, and while he was there, they said, listen, we have a vacant building here on the campus, and we're willing to give it to you to set up your laboratory. He took them up on the offer, and him and his partner, Dr. Christoph Westphal, geared up together, and they launched Sirtris, Sirtris Pharmaceuticals, with one goal in mind, to study resveratrol and its benefit to heart health.
You bet. And what they actually find? What they find with resveratrol in relationship to the heart?
Well, when the topic of wine came into the picture, regarding the heart health, there was a lot of disagreement on that, because they said, well, the Italians drink a lot of wine, but they have very high rates of heart disease. What's the difference between the Italians and the French? And the difference is that the Italians, going back to the time of the Romans and even before, have always known to be engineers. They've always, they built aquifers and aqueducts, and they always had an ample supply of fresh, clean drinking water. The French people, on the other hand, they neglected their infrastructure. They weren't as proactive as the Italians were. They really greatly neglected their infrastructure, and as a result of that, the water in France became so bad that they were drinking wine like everyone else was drinking water. And whereas the Italians would wait until their children reached adolescence, their early teens, before they would allow them to have wine, and even at that, extent, very small amount, the French were giving wine to children as young as 6 months of age. And once Dr. Sinclair realized this, he launched a first round of studies based on what he had learned about the two different cultures. And what he did was he raised twin animals, and identical twin mice, twin rats, twin monkeys, and twin rabbits. And he gave each identical twin the same high-fat diet, but he gave one of the twins resveratrol supplements and the other one no supplements. Now, it's key to point out that the resveratrol supplements that Dr. Sinclair administered were prepared fresh in his laboratory. He actually imported and had delivered the muscadine grape, the dark purple grape, his most popular variety in France, which is used to make the red wine they've been drinking all these years. He wanted to emulate as close as he could the conditions in France, so he had these grapes delivered fresh to his laboratory. He had his own press, and the key point everyone has to pay attention to here is that he would squeeze the grapes and administer the resveratrol right after he squeezed it. So it was in a very high state of potency. Years later, not long after all his discoveries became published, and nutritional companies jumped on the bandwagon and started making resveratrol supplements, they missed a very key, important point about resveratrol, and that
let's hold that off.
Sure,
we'll talk
go
about
ahead.
That in a little bit. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Just kind of keep people listening. Otherwise, they'll go, oh, I got the answer, and then they'll jump off the call. So
here you go. We'll talk about that.
Right?
Yeah, sure.
It's like the final chapter. You got to read the.
We got to keep them in suspense with a big surprise ending. That's for sure.
That's right. And so as you're talking about, Dr. Sinclair and Dr. Westphal, and they were working at Harvard. And they'd made all these important discoveries. They're going to take and they're going to publish them. They're going to get really the science of resveratrol out to the world. Then all of a sudden, did you say it was GlaxoSmithKline that kind of stepped in?
Well, here's what happened. Just to summarize real quick, in his first round of studies, he raised these animals and he gave one the resveratrol supplements and the other didn't have them, and they both had a high-fat diet. So ones without the resveratrol supplements became obese, and they died at an early age of coronary artery disease, where the other sibling that had the supplements, lived much, much longer and did not gain weight, did not become obese. And when he autopsied both animals, he found out the ones that died earlier, their organs were gray and worn out. But the ones that lived longer, their organs were pink and healthy, and they looked like the internal organs of a much younger animal. He took note of that, and in his second round of studies, after he realized, well, if you happen to be fortunate enough to grow up in France and you were given wine at a very early age, he found out that it was actually like putting a coating on the inside of the walls of the arteries and making them slippery so that the waste material from the cells that get dumped into the circulatory system, instead of adhering to the walls of the arteries and building up coronary artery disease, that coating actually facilitated the movement of this waste material through the vessels into the liver and out of the body, and hence they became immune to getting coronary artery disease. So now his second round was, well, if you happen to be fortunate enough to be, given wine at a very early age, chances are your risk of heart disease is greatly diminished. However, a person like myself over here in America at 58 years old, arteries completely plugged with plaque, and the approach over here to treating coronary artery disease is either keep shoving stents in there and pushing the plaque to the side to increase the flow, or bypass the clogged arteries altogether with coronary bypass surgery. But there's really no effort focused on getting the plaque out of the arteries. But Dr. Sinclair made a startling discovery when he repeated this experiment with aged animals. And in particular, the mice and the rats that were aged to the point where their original thick, black, shiny coats had turned over to, gray, dull, faded gray coats where big blotches of the hair had fallen out and whatnot. And when he administered high doses of resveratrol to them, not only was he able to clear up the arteries, imagine, and reverse the coronary artery disease, a very significant discovery. But in addition to that, he found that high doses of resveratrol actually made them grow back thick, black, shiny coats, and they looked like young animals all over again. And when he autopsied them, it had already been understood at that point in science that the brains of these animals would lose 25% of their original size and only have 75% of their original size left. And they regenerated their full-size brains back. I mean, this was a startling discovery. He was the first scientist in history to make the connection that high doses of resveratrol can not only clear up your arteries, but it also can turn a gene called the SIRT1 gene. It can turn this gene back on. And this gene has a carryover in humans from animals, and near identical in that in humans, for most people at age 26, that gene turns off. And when it turns off, men start seeing their hair thin, or they lose their hair altogether and go bald, and women see gray at the roots of their hair, start dyeing their hair, and both men and women notice that their skin loses its youthful appearance and starts taking on the appearance of lines and wrinkles and aging. And inside, the organs of the body are aging at an accelerated pace, because even those aged animals, when he autopsied them, their organs look pink and healthy like the animal. They looked as good on the inside and young as they did on the outside. And so he was actually the first scientist to prove through experimentation that high doses of resveratrol can turn that gene back on and actually this really, is a major age-reversing discovery. And, of course, he became famous. If you go to YouTube and you type in Dr. David Sinclair and the resveratrol, resveratrol, and you're going to see him on Nightline in 2020 and 60 Minutes. And as a result of that, nutritional companies jumped on the bandwagon and started making nutritional supplements. But here's the crucial thing, that just before Dr. Sinclair was ready to progress to human trials on resveratrol, a major pharma company stepped in, GlaxoSmithKline, and they bought Sertra's Pharmaceuticals and all the intellectual property for $750 million. And their intent originally was to use that, further advance that technology and develop a pharmaceutical drug based on, resveratrol. But what happened, I followed developments, at Glaxo, and I saw them move it from one large facility to a much smaller facility, and then they got moved again to another smaller facility. And they kind of got put in the back burner, and they literally have kind of decided, I guess, corporate-wise, to pursue making generic versions of statin drugs, because the statins became very popular, and they were selling into the billions of dollars, and I guess they wanted to get a piece of the statin market. But you and I know, Doc, that statins are really not good for you, because they lower both the bad as well as the good cholesterol. And I've heard scientists and doctors say, hey, if you have to have one or the other extreme, if you have to have both good and bad lowered or both good and bad elevated. You're actually better having both good and bad elevated because the good is so important to your health. And these drugs, these statin drugs, are depressing the good as well as the bad cholesterol. And we know that's not good for you, Doc, right?
You got that right. Well, and so basically what you're saying is Dr. Sinclair made some amazing discoveries about resveratrol. For those of you that are on the call and you don't want to try and memorize what Bill was just saying, just say they made some amazing discoveries about resveratrol. And guess what? When GlaxoSmithKline bought the rights, the intellectual rights to everything, they pushed it under the carpet. And they owned it, and they said you no longer can use this, and it was gone. It was gone. And so now we can get into the kind of the other part of the story that I know you're just fidgeting in your chair to tell the rest of the story, is that so the resveratrol, the important part that Dr. Sinclair found, but most of these nutritional companies didn't look at, was that there's some importance in how the resveratrol is processed. And I'm not going to tell the story. I'm going to hand it back to you. Let's hear that part of the story.
Sure. And just for a footnote here, that laboratory is now known as it's a shrine to Dr. David Sinclair. It's called the Sinclair Lab. It's still right there on the campus of Harvard Medical School. And Dr. David Sinclair is now a fully tenured professor of genetics at Harvard Medical School as a legacy to what he has discovered. He's, and thank God he's still with us, and he's my honor. He's my hero, I should say. I greatly honor the man for the discoveries that he made. But now here's where the big problem came in. When the nutritional manufacturing companies, and it wasn't just some of them, Doc, it was all of them. All of the companies that jumped into the bandwagon of making resveratrol supplements, there was a huge challenge in there that none of them were aware of. And it took Tom Maurer, the visionary, and Sisel International to realize that all these supplements they were producing were bogus. I mean, it's almost a shock to hear that people were spending money on resveratrol supplements and not getting any resveratrol other than the word resveratrol on the package. And I was one of those people over 5 years before I came to Sisel. I should, clarify that, my heart disease got so bad over the years, I couldn't find a nutritional way to get my cholesterol and triglycerides down, and eventually they had to put me on statin drugs. And despite being on the medication, over the 12 years before I came to Sisel, I had to go to the hospital 4 times, once by ambulance for pain and tightness in the chest, and I underwent 4 coronary angioplasties, had 6 stents implanted in my heart, and I knew each time I went in for one of these procedures that wasn't the solution. It was just a Band-Aid. It was just, it was their way of dealing with plaque in the arteries, but I knew that Dr. Sinclair had proven that you can get rid of the plaque in the arteries with high doses of resveratrol. The problem is that these supplements, these many supplements on the market, when Tom Maurer stepped into the picture, and he was ready, and Sisel International was ready to introduce their first resveratrol supplement. Tom's got a philosophy, and basically he said, I don't necessarily have to be first to the market with a product. And he certainly did that with the age pill, without a doubt, in large scale. But regarding his other supplements, when I do come to the market with a product, it'll be number one in its class. And so what he did was, what Sisel International did was, before they even started designing their own resveratrol supplement, they bought every resveratrol supplement available in the global marketplace, and they tested them. And they found out something shocking. They found out by the time these supplements got to the end consumer, upwards of 98% of the potency of the resveratrol was depleted or gone, lost due to oxidation. And what Sisel scientists discovered, that once you crush the grape, and the resveratrol is removed from inside the protective environment of the grape, once you take it out of that protective environment, it becomes very highly unstable, and it'll readily oxidize or break down when it comes into contact with air and light and room temperature. We understand oxidation is a process that changes, a compound from one thing to another. I got a match here in my hand, Doc. I'm going to give it to you. Oh, wait a second. Let me strike it. Okay, it burns. I blow it out. Now I give it to you. It's not a match anymore. It's totally useless. You can't use this match. And this is kind of, an analogy of what we have been experiencing with all this resveratrol supplements. By the time they got to the end consumer, the match has already been lit, burned, and blown out, and you were getting something that was totally useless. And while I was on the medication all these years before Sisel, I had to get my blood tested 3 times a year, every 4 months. And while I was on these different supplements, I was using these blood tests to gauge the effectiveness of all these different supplements. And I found no changes at all whatsoever. Nothing was changing. And I got to the point where I came to realize that these supplements, either the technology is wrong or something's missing or the supplements just aren't working. And it was the latter. The fact that I've come to realize that it was the supplements, they just basically weren't delivering resveratrol in a high state of potency and in a form that could be bioavailable to the cells. But it took the expertise of Tom Maurer and Sisel International to come up with a patented resveratrol delivery system that maintains the potency, the high potency, just like it was back there when it was inside the grape. And there's no other product on the market that's been able to do this. This is patented processes that Tom used to create a product called Eternity. And I happen to be very fortunate to have discovered Sisel International in August of 2009, right around the time when he had just first introduced his product, and I got on it right away. And after just 6 weeks on this product, and I was taking the original one, which is in the 500 milliliter bottles. We now have the larger 750s, but in the 500 milliliter bottle, the dose was a half ounce. And my sponsor told me something very important. He says, make sure that you sip it, one tiny sip at a time. Don't drink it straight down. And the reason is that Sisel made this so bioavailable. They nanosized it. They made it, the particles, very, very tiny in solution, and then they put a coating on them to emulate on a microscopic level the protective coating of the grape so that it preserves the potency. But because of the tiny size of the particles, we can actually absorb it right through, get a great deal of absorption right through the tissues of the mouth. And now with the new product, the 750, I've determined I've been able to get 21 sips. I call it the 21-gun salute, and each one is, sip, swizzle, and swallow, three S's. Sip, swizzle, swallow. Take the next tiny sip. Sip, swizzle, and swallow. Sounds like a new dance, doesn't it, Doc? But anyway, you want to sip, swizzle, and swallow, and do that 21-gun salute. Do this first thing in the morning on an empty stomach. You can even do this before you take your age pill, because you see, as you swizzle it in your mouth, a great deal of it's going to get absorbed right through the mucous membranes. They call it transmucosal absorption, and there's not a resveratrol product on the market that will give you that benefit of absorption through the front end, right through your mouth. It goes into the lymphatic system, and then what you swallow, that coating protects it against the acids of the stomach, and then you take that shot glass, and I recommend a calibrated shot glass with the lines on it so you can accurately measure out 3/4 of an ounce each morning, and this way one bottle is going to last you a full 30 days per adult, one serving a day, 3/4 of an ounce measured accurately. Take 21 tiny sips, swizzle, and swallow each one, and what doesn't get absorbed in your mouth sits in your stomach. Fill up that shot glass with water and drink it down. Do at least two water chasers. That'll push it out of the stomach into the small intestine, the duodenum, where the villi, the tiny finger-like projections on the wall of the small intestine. And you now get further absorption on the back end through the bloodstream. So you actually got the resveratrol at a high state of potency coming into your body on the front end through your mouth and in the back end through the bloodstream. And the results after just being on this product, and remember, I was on the original product, only a half ounce. After 6 weeks, I noticed, number one, I was losing a pound a week without changing my diet and exercise. I come to learn later that was a pound of plaque being washed off the walls of my arteries each week. You think of the surface area of all the vessels inside your body. It's massive. It's acres in size. And so I was losing massive amounts of plaque, a pound of it a week. And after 6 weeks, I went to the doctor's office to have my blood taken and sent off to the lab for one of my routine blood tests that happened to come up 6 weeks after I started this. And when I went to visit my doctor for the follow-up, and he brought out the blood test results, he was flabbergasted. He couldn't believe it. He said to me, we just got the lowest cholesterol and triglyceride readings in your entire 32-year medical history of these readings, going back to when it was first tested when you were 25, and they tested the cholesterol and triglycerides, found out they were through the roof. He said, even with the medication, the lowest we can, from since then, he goes, the lowest, even with the medication, we can get the cholesterol was 220 and the triglycerides down to 330. He opens up the report and says to me, how did you get them both down to the 170s? What in the world did you do since you were here 4 months ago? I asked him a question. I said, doctor, have you ever heard of resveratrol? He said, yes, I have. I said, Doctor, I never told you this, but for the last 5 years, I've been taking resveratrol supplements. But because I didn't see any notable change in these levels, I saw no change at all in my health. My cardiac health continued to decline over these last 5 years. And as you know, I had 2 more procedures and more stents, and my condition was just getting worse, not better. But now I've got something to talk to you about. I discovered a company that knows how to make resveratrol into a supplement like no other company in the world knows how to do this. And now I've got something really exciting to share with him. I told him about the Eternity and showed him the bottle, and he was absolutely stunned. I put a big smile on his face for sure, Doc.
You bet. Well, and those results are just, amazing. And tell us a little bit. You've been on the product now. That was 2009. It's 2017. So you've been on the product now for 8 years. What's happened as far as your cardiovascular health? Tell us a little bit more about the kind of that part of it.
Well, Doc, 3 months before I discovered Sisel, so I got on Eternity in August of 2009. 3 months prior to that, in May of 2009, I was being discharged from the hospital after having had my 4th angioplasty over the 12 years before Sisel and my 6th stent implanted. And I was getting ready to leave the room. The nurse comes in and pulls the curtain back between the 2 beds, and my roommate on the other side and myself got to introduce ourselves. And I was 58, he was 68. And as I'm buttoning up my shirt, I said to him, I just got my 6th stent. And he said to me, he just got his 16th stent. And I was like, what? You got to be kidding me. I walked out of there realizing that, from what I learned when I studied medicine many years earlier, that shoving stents into arteries filled with plaque is not the solution. And here I'm just hearing this gentleman telling me he's got a collection of 16, and I was just imagining, when am I coming back for my next one? I was 58, going on 98. My hair was falling out, and I didn't even think I was going to be around to see my 2 sons graduate from college, Doc. 3 months later, everything changed when I discovered Sisel and got on this remarkable, first of its kind, high-potency resveratrol supplement called Eternity. And after this 6 weeks, when my doctor saw the results, he almost was a little bit skeptical because he said to me, I'm not sure if I want to believe this. I said, why? He said, look, he opened up the 3 pages of the report, 43 parameters. He goes, look, even a healthy person, you got to be somewhere in between the low number on the left end of the line and the high number on the right end of the line. You got to be somewhere in the middle. He says, even healthy people, as I look down, it's a big zigzag. They're a little high on this parameter. They're a little low on that parameter. He says, but he says, I could take a ruler and draw a line straight down the middle. He said, you're right down the middle on everything. He said, this is perfect blood chemistry, and I'll be honest with you. I never see perfect blood chemistry for my patients. I always see fluctuations. So he said, I'm wondering if the test was skewed, if they didn't have it calibrated properly. I showed him the bottle. He looked at the ingredients. He said, listen, I don't have a problem with you taking this. You can stay on it, and let's see what it looks like 4 months from now. Well, I came back 4 months later, and sure enough, the cholesterol and triglycerides was still down to the lowest numbers, and yes, I was right down the middle, and now he's finally starting to believe it. And that's when I said, Doc, I want to get off the medication. I've been looking for an alternative for over 32 years. I finally found it, and I'm ready to get off the meds. And he said, well, I don't think it's a good idea just to quit cold turkey. Let me talk to your cardiologist. And what they did was they worked out a plan over the next 12 months to gradually reduce the medication. And I want to emphasize that I did work with my doctors on this. I didn't just, call all the shots. I went along with their suggestion of gradually working on a weaned-down program. And he said, instead of coming to see us every 4 months, you come and see us every 3 months. Well, guess what? During that 12-month period, my doctor took note of the fact that I remember I mentioned I was going bald at the time. My hair started growing back in. And my doctor's like, your hair's growing back in. I said, I'm probably one of the first human validations of Dr. Sinclair's animal studies where he was able to reverse the exterior aging of these animals and not only clear up their arteries, but reverse their aging and make them grow back thick, healthy, black, shiny coats from their, aged, gray, faded coats. I said, I'm experiencing SIRT1 reactivation in my body from this this really had to be Sisel's first major age reversal product. And as a result of that, at the end of 12 months now, whereas I couldn't walk more than 2 miles an hour when I first started taking this product because I had 6 stents in my heart and I was crippled with coronary artery disease. After the 12 months, I'll take you to April of 2011. I'm off all the medication. And at that point, I wanted to try and get my third-class medical back so I can go back to flying planes. I'd got my license when I was younger, but I lost the third-class medical because of my medical condition. Well, guess what? I was able to pass a very rigorous stress test prescribed by the chief flight surgeon out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I passed it so well they reinstated my third-class medical to go back to flying. My doctors basically could not believe it, and they described it in their own words. They said I made a spectacular recovery from heart disease as a result of this amazing product. And, Doc, that's the end of my story. Back over to you.
Well, that's not really the end of your story, but that's the end of this story, right?
That's right. You're right, Doc. That's right.
And I'm going to have you back on to talk about, what's happened since you had the H pill, but we won't get into that today. We'll just kind of add on it. But, you said that Dr. Sinclair made 2 discoveries, that have advanced medicine and health. What was his second one in? Just give us an idea.
Sure. The first one was that resveratrol can clear up your arteries and reverse coronary artery disease, and the second one was that high doses of resveratrol can also reactivate SIRT1, the gene that controls the rate at which we age. So he actually made those 2 startling discoveries in his experiments.
That's so cool.
And that's why I grew my hair back. That's why my hair stopped falling out and grew back. So very
just
very
like
intriguing.
Those rats. You're our rat, Mr. Bill.
Oh, as a rat in my own way, yes. A happy rat with a big smile
running through the rat cages, the maze.
There you go.
As we're listening to this, and everybody's listening to it, and they're going, "Oh man, I'm not a scientist. I can't remember all those big words that Bill just threw at us." And so the key to it is that what you want to remember is that most companies don't make their resveratrol product properly. You don't have to remember what they do wrong or anything like that. But again, like Tom has taught us, when Tom Maurer talks about going out and marketing, he says that you want to show people that their product maybe there's something wrong with it, and so what we basically do, if you can just picture this, and you want to get people to be able to picture it, is you say we take each little tiny molecule of resveratrol, and in a way, we're creating a tiny little grape skin around each little resveratrol. We're keeping it in that microscopic level, but we're creating that little tiny grape skin around it so that it's creating the same environment that Dr. Sinclair had in his original studies. And so you don't have to get into all of these other things that Bill was talking about, but you're trying to get people so they're interested in it, and you're trying to get people so that now you can send them a copy of this call, and you can say, here, listen to this. It's a 30-minute explanation of really how this works and how it makes things different. Here's one man's story, right? And you can share Bill's story because it's in Bill's words. In Bill's opinion, right, he can say it saved his life. Look at the rest of his family. Look at his family history, and I hear that all the time from people. Oh, yeah, I'm going to die from heart disease because it runs in my family. And what if they heard this story? What if they heard this story and it changed their life? And then we start adding on top of it, the age pill. And I'll tell you what, nicotinamide riboside, which is one of the primary ingredients in the age pill, and resveratrol, these 2 work good together. It's like ham and cheese, right? And it's like cheese in a burger, right? They work good together. They just fit good together, and because they make things work, the 2 of them work together. And we'll save that. I'll just leave that. And Bill, would you be our guest maybe next week again?
Absolutely, would love to, Doc. We can continue the story for sure.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that, and I think our listeners would too. So, Bill, thanks for joining us. Everybody, thanks for being on the doctor's call with us today. I sure appreciate you taking your time out of the day. And for those of you listening to the recording, thanks for doing that as well. And get this out, because a lot of people, they say, oh, yeah, I'm already taking resveratrol. It's not doing much. I hear that all the time, and you're not taking real resveratrol. You're taking a look-alike. You're taking a pretend product, an US2 product. You want to take the real thing, you got to get Eternity from Sisel. So, everyone, thanks for your time. Have a great day. Bill, thanks for taking a half hour of your time and being with us today. I always enjoy it. Thank you.
My pleasure, Doc. Thanks for having me.
All right, Helen and DW, thanks for always getting this call out to everybody, and we sure appreciate that as well, and it makes a difference. We'll make a difference today. Bye-bye.